Thank you for the questions. Let's start with the issue of the national dialogue. The national dialogue has not stalled. You will recall that sometime last week, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation and other foundations convened a briefing to announce that the work on their part has started on the national dialogue. Of course, because we do not have a full cabinet, and therefore the president could not assign ministers into maybe an interministerial committee which will then work with all the partners and stakeholders to prepare for that national dialogue. If you recall, the president, both in his acceptance speech on the 19th and the 19th of June, indicated that we are going to convene that national dialogue. So there's no stalling. And if you recall, when the president announced members of cabinet that he's appointing, that he then requested the Chief Justice to swear us into office. He has indicated the reasons for the delay in appointing a cabinet, but actually we're still very early in general. DRC took, is it 4 months to do the appointment? At some point, Nigeria, because I see the examples that were given were not outside of this continent. At some point, Nigeria took 6 months between the swearing in of the president and the appointment of the cabinet. So I think it's just that South Africa, we want to think ourselves as unique, but you then give us an electoral outcome that is not unique. So we then have to behave like everybody found in that situation. And you refer to deadlock breaking mechanism as referred to in the statement of intent. And there was a question of if we don't find each other on the priorities, whether we're going to fight. As I've indicated, the sixth administration has ended. When it ends with its priorities, with whatever. That's why even political parties, when they went to campaign, they had new election manifestos. Those who chose to reiterate same manifestos is their own choices. So from the manifestos of the political parties that are in the GNU, is 11 of us, General? 11 of us. Well, then the directors general are looking at what are the priorities from the ANC, from the DA, Al-Jamaa, Good, PAC, UDM, IFP. I can name the 11 of them. And because you've got this requirement that say you cannot have all priorities included, it will be difficult to implement. You then say what then becomes a filter of the priorities. And we have indicated that our filter is the National Development Plan goals and targets. So if it doesn't help us achieve the goals of the National Development Plan, it cannot be part of the competing priorities, because you need to have a certain numbers to implement. And why is the NDP important is because the seventh administration is the administration that's going to be responsible for whether this country achieve Vision 2030 of a better South Africa and a prosperous South Africa for all. Because by the term of the seventh administration will end in 2029, the eighth administration, when it takes over, there's going to be only 1 year to implement, and that 1 year will never be enough. So that is the filter. So in that score, that is one part of saying how do we filter and how do we discuss. And that's why I said the directors general are already preparing. They've done the analysis, which they'll present at the Lekgotla, and the Lekgotla will negotiate and will discuss. The first part I need to articulate is that at cabinet, there's not been a cabinet decision by voting. And it did not mean even when it was ANC cabinet, we didn't differ. We differed very vehemently on issues, and don't ask me for which issues, otherwise I'll be fired immediately before I even go back to office. Remember, I was only sworn in yesterday. I have not gone to office. Offices are in Pretoria. So don't ask me on which items did we differ. We differed vehemently, but there was a solution found. Either you go back and you find each other and resubmit, and because matters do not just, in terms of processing, do not just go to cabinet. They go through what we call the DG technical clusters. From that technical clusters, then they'll start at FORSAT, and then they'll be discussed at, they'll discuss at the technical cluster, they go to FORSAT. From FORSAT, they then have to go to what we call the clusters, which are ministers and deputy ministers in the clusters. They discuss those matters and recommend them to a cabinet committee. And from that cabinet committee, they then get processed to cabinet. So the cabinet is a final arbiter on matters, but most issues that are not agreed at cluster level, they don't find their way into the cabinet committees. But if you have to ask a request for direct access to cabinet, then there will be special circumstances for them to go there. So we have not anticipated any deadlock, because the mechanisms of resolving deadlock are in place. And if I speak from experience, President Ramaphosa has demonstrated his ability to negotiate. General Holomisa will agree, we're sitting here. And this situation that the GNU and the composition, the constitution, where we find ourselves, is because of his outstanding skill of negotiating and reconciling different views. And as the head of that cabinet, he's going to make sure that cabinet functions. The other issues, if there are political or ideology issues, those matters are not matters of cabinet, they are matters of the political parties. They will have to go and find each other. And related to this question is the question of whether the parties how will it work, because if they differ with ANC policies, there are no ANC policies in government that gets implemented. They are government policies. There will be, in this instance, there will be a UDM policy, there will be a DA policy, there will be an Inkatha policy, there will be an Al-Jama policy, there will be a good policy, there will be a PA policy. That when they are adopted, they stop being the policies or the programs of those parties. They become the programs of government. Because if you assume that it's going to remain ANC, UDM, whatever, where they're not functioning as a collective as required by the Constitution. Because if what UDM or what PAC is proposing is relevant to the Department of Defense and Military Veterans, and I use yourself, Minister, and DM, because you're here, that policy will have to, and that program will have to be implemented as long as it has been agreed by cabinet at the Lekgotla, and it also goes formally to be adopted by cabinet, and because that's what the National Treasury will fund. It's not an ANC thing, it's a government program. Of course, individual parties will require their deployees to brief them of what is happening with this, what is happening with that. That has nothing to do with us as government. It's party political matters. The parties to the GNU will have to go and find themselves. And you talk about, I'd ask that they do the calculation for me. So you can't eat your cake and have it. This is the English saying. So parties to the GNU, and that's why earlier I said the governing party, but in this instant, governing parties. So it's not an ANC government. It's the government of national unity. All political parties who are signatories to the statement of intent, they are members of the governing parties, or if you want to, they've collapsed themselves into a governing party because they are governing together. So you can't be, and we had a discussion with the general yesterday about one of the things, you can't be a minister from, or a deputy minister from the UDM, and then you go and oppose a government decision. Because what we are adopting as a program of action of government will then take back also to our constituent organization and say, this is what we have agreed on. That's why I said the ministers and deputy ministers are appointed, because they're going to be the Lekgotla. They must then use this period to consult with their DGs to say, as FOSAD, what have you recommended? Actually, we think, recommend this over this, and they have that discussion so that the document that comes to the Lekgotla is thoroughly and robustly consulted. And by that we are assuming, and I know assumption is and I don't want to speak French on national television. I'm very new on the role, so I'm not going to speak French. So the ministers and deputy ministers, because myself and Minister Mtsega from the ANC will have to take what we think are the priorities from the departments, respective departments that we're responsible for, to the ANC to say, in terms of our directors general, this is what they're recommending. Are you comfortable with it? But that you leave to the individual parties and the member and their deployees. As we go into cabinet, we are not carrying a party card. We are carrying a government cap. If you remember the oath of office, we took oath and we committed to serve the Republic. our priority is South Africa. When we said, so help me God, or I affirm, we were saying our priority is South Africa, but not the political parties where we come from. And as we enter cabinet, we take off the political party cap. We are the government of the Republic of South Africa, and we govern for all, for those who elected us and those who did not elect us. And the program of action of government, which will be articulated in the MTSF of the 7th administration, which will be agreed to on the 11th and 12th of July at the Lekgotla, and announced by the President on the 18th of July at the joint sitting of the two houses of Parliament, will then be the program of government that we collectively implement. I'm hoping I'm clear on those, and then you ask the question of the SOCs. The President indicated that the SOCs are going to the presidency, but the policy departments will remain responsible for the policies. We'll articulate later in terms of the functionality of that modality, but we wanted to deal with how the government will work. And the President, you asked a question around the Presidency Oversight Committee, and that is the responsibility of Parliament. The matter will have to be discussed and agreed to in Parliament, and or not agreed to in Parliament. We can't, as the doctrine of separation of powers, we can't pronounce on behalf of Parliament. And any party in Parliament, it's required to, it has a right to table a motion or submit a matter for substantive discussion through the normal parliamentary processes, and we, as the executive, will then go and respond to that matter. And you recall there's also a Parliament of National Unity in its own, so, and we are 71% in the Parliament of National Unity, because Parliament is a numbers issue. With those